Hey, DawgNation, it's Brandon Adams, the host of DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. I'm glad you're here today. One of the things we're going to do is try to do a little bit of a roundup of everything that is currently going on with Georgia in its final pursuit of its 2019 signing class. We'll start the show with that today. Also, later on in the show, it's going to be really fun. We're going to get a chance to hear an interview that I did this week with New England Patriots running back Sony Michel, about to take center stage in the Super Bowl, and we'll have a chance to talk to Michel about his thoughts on all of that as he heads towards the big game. And a guy we talked about earlier this week, Tony Barnhart, a great longtime college football writer, friend of the program, kind of stirred up some Dog fans with his ranking of the top 15 Georgia running backs of all time. We'll have some fun with him on that subject today and a whole lot more. We're glad you're with us as DawgNation Daily begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Later on today, in really just a few minutes, you're going to get a chance to hear from Sony Michel. We had a chance to catch up with Sony earlier this week, and what a thrill that was to talk to him. And I mentioned this first question out of the box to him. You know, it seems like just yesterday we were all standing there at DawgNation Appreciation a year ago talking with these guys about to go into the NFL, and now Sony, he's all grown up. He is in the Super Bowl. He's one of the top rookies in all of college football and in the NFL, I should say. And, boy, what an amazing year it's been for him. And he'll reflect back on all of that with us a little later on in today's program. We've also got our buddy Tony Barnhart coming up in a little bit, too. We'll have some fun with how Sony and the other running backs rank on the all-time list of great backs at the school that thinks of itself as Running Back University. But before that, we are getting close to National Signing Day. It is a little less than a week away, and there are still some things for Georgia to be done when it comes to closing out this 2019 signing class. Now, many of you are aware the work was mostly done back in December. That's just the new landscape and the new calendar when it comes to college football. But Kirby Smart told us way back then on the date of the early signing period in December that just because a lot of guys got signed and many of them were the elite 4- and 5-star variety, don't let that confusion, don't let that trick you into thinking that Georgia doesn't still have some work to be done. In fact, here is what Kirby Smart said then, laying the groundwork for what Georgia's still trying to do now. Here's Kirby.
Areas we still got to work on or we fell short on is probably defensive back and receiver and also probably some more offensive linemen or another offensive lineman. So those are things we're trying to add to this class to make it complete. But we're excited about this group and very pleased with it.
So I think it's really funny there and interesting. Probably interesting is better than funny. Kirby mentions three positions specifically. He mentions defensive back, wide receiver, and offensive line. Now, despite the fact that Javon Shepard took a visit to Georgia this past weekend, I guess if I'm doing a mock class, I guess I'm probably not expecting Georgia to sign an offensive lineman in February, even though Shepard was just on campus. My guess is that Kirby had his eye on like a 5-star type name, and obviously in that case, most of those ships have sailed, and so therefore Georgia, I'm believing, probably does not sign an offensive lineman, even though Javon Shepard was just on campus. But he does mention defensive back and wide receiver, and that is where things get kind of interesting. In fact, if you watched yesterday Before the Hedges, 3 p.m. on the DawgNation video channels, also now available as a podcast too, if you saw Before the Hedges, we dove in deep to some of those other defensive back and wide receiver names that are still on the board for UGA. I guess some of these may be a little more, I don't want to say realistic. Realistic may be the wrong word. Some of these a little more likely than others. That might be the case. And maybe the most likely of all is the biggest need of all. I'm talking about the 4-star defensive back, Kyer Alam, a guy that Georgia had a chance to host on its official visit a couple of weeks ago on the weekend that it announced Charlton Warren as its defensive backs coach. As Jeff Sintel explained yesterday, the Elam situation is one that he thinks that Georgia fans ought to have some confidence in. Nothing's ever given and final when it comes to recruiting, of course, but when you hear Jeff re-up something that he said a week ago in terms of Georgia being in a good spot for Elam, if you're a Dog fan, I think this kind of ought to make you feel good. Here is Jeff on Kyer Alam.
He took a recent official visit to Colorado. He was out there in the snow, obviously chummy there with Mel Tucker. I continue to think Georgia's in a really good spot there with him. I think they were in a good spot prior to Tucker, with Tucker, and now after Tucker, much less with the situation there with Charlton Warren.
I think it's a really strong statement from Jeff. I mean, oftentimes, you know, it's hard to sometimes get someone in that industry to sort of be pinned down and say so-and-so is in a good spot. So Jeff's actually pretty well out there on the Elam situation right now. I don't know what that means for the ultimate future, but if, as I said, as a Georgia fan, you do take it as some degree of good news that Jeff is as open and candid about Elam as he is. And on the subject of the Colorado official visit, I think we have do we have the photo? Yeah, there is Elam with a guy that he has a very close relationship with, and Mel Tucker. Tucker's going to get visits like this in Boulder, Colorado. And Mike McIntyre, I'm guessing, probably didn't get a lot of guys like Kyer Lam on campus. That's one of the reasons why Tucker gets hired. And you do see up in the top right corner the snow coming down in Boulder, and Elam standing there on the field. I don't know if that works for an official visit or not, but it's certainly an interesting, unique look that Colorado can provide that other schools are not going to be able to provide. But one way or another, it sounds like Jeff still feels pretty good about Kyer Lam. That was from yesterday's Before the Hedges. Now, that brings me to another name on this list. A moment ago, you heard Kirby Smart say, hey, we're looking for wide receivers. We want to add a wide receiver. We'd like to be able to do that. Of course, if you're thinking wide receiver, you know the name that I have talked about a lot on this program. So much so that I get grief from all corners about this, but I do believe that Georgia needs another potential game changer at that position. I think Dominic Blaylock is going to be that guy, certainly can be that guy, but in a perfect world, he wouldn't be the only guy that Georgia adds of that variety and of that stripe for 2019 class. I've said before that I'd love to see Georgia get George Pickens, the 5-star receiver from Alabama, and Jeff Sintel yesterday was kind of giving me some more grief about that. How realistic, how likely is this to happen? I don't know. I've been very clear that I want it to happen, and Jeff kind of poked at me a bit on that. So if we're going to have the full conversation about what's still going on, I think you got to mention Pickens, and here's what Jeff kind of chatted me about on that subject yesterday.
I don't know. There's this really popular podcaster that really wants 5-star receivers at Georgia all the time.
No doubt.
All the stinking time. George Pickens fits that bill. You got to look at a lot of complicated issues there with Pickens. Is he going to flip from Auburn? Will Georgia hold off LSU? Best player available for Georgia as well. Does Pickens become one of those guys in terms of what if there's a lot of yeses there? A yes from Nick Cross, a yes from Kyer Lam, a yes from Brett Seither. Then that becomes very interesting for the final flurry for the 2019 class.
So I think Jeff asks a pretty provocative question. If you've got a few different options, does George Pickens leap to the top of your list as best player available? For me, he would. And I know what many of you are going to shout at your device right now. I realize it is a very popular topic on message boards about whatever might or might not be going on with Pickens academically. The truth is, that's not really a subject we get into here on DawgNation Daily. We feel like guys deserve a certain degree of privacy as they work through their school stuff, and it's not my news to report on what might be going on with that, but obviously it is out there. I can't pretend that people aren't saying that kind of stuff. That's been a part of the conversation, but I'm going to assume that if Georgia is still chasing down Pickens, that they feel good about that situation, that Pickens is doing what he needs to do to be in the kind of position to be an impact freshman by handling whatever might be happening off the field. All I can do is make that assumption because, I'm not in the school. I'm not in the private meetings at the University of Georgia. But if Georgia goes down this road, I'm going to have to assume they have some assurances about what might be happening with Pickens off the field. Because on the field, and if you're watching on video, you just saw some of this, I think the story with Pickens speaks for itself. This is a player that I'd love to see Georgia get. And if Jeff wants to use that phrase of, quote, best player available, if Pickens is indeed available, it's hard to imagine too many people having a higher upside, regardless of position, than what Pickens might bring to the table. Then that brings us to another subject that came up on yesterday's edition of Before the Hedges. That's Nick Cross, the 4-star defensive back. Rivals has reported that Cross could take an unofficial visit to Georgia this week. Cross himself has indicated that he's going to take his final official visit to Penn State this weekend. I thought that was game over, go home earlier in the week when I talked to Jeff as a part of our Marlowe's Tavern Tell on Tuesday. Jeff pumped the brakes on that then. We also had the interesting subplot to this of the fact that Cross briefly releases his top 4 on Twitter and then yanks that thing down. If you're watching a video, we'll show this, and if you're listening radio or podcast, I'll have to explain what I don't know if it's controversy, but what the conversation has been. So on this particular image, you got the background, which features the 4 logos: Maryland, Florida State, Penn State, Georgia. He's committed to Florida State. And then you've got the uniform that Cross is wearing, which is an amalgam of the jersey of Florida State, Penn State, and Maryland. And the helmet, the best I can tell, solely belongs to Georgia. Now, I didn't make too much of this. This just sort of felt like the artistic license that you have to take here. But Jeff did find some interest in the way this graphic is put together. And in fact, here is what Jeff said about that. So if you're a Georgia fan, you want to let your imagination do some work for you. Jeff certainly contemplates some potential meanings about this top 4 graphic. I thought this was fun. Here's Jeff again.
Are you doing any sort of CSI D&D right here looking at this thing? Wouldn't you want to put, I'm gonna say 2 things that might stir up a little bit of trouble right here. Number 1, if you're committed to a school, wouldn't you want to put that spear as the school you're committed to up there?
One would think.
Now this is the part that's going to make your mind go crazy. I remember the last time there was a multi-faceted kind of, fragmented, splintered edit like this for a big recruit. That was Isaiah Wilson. And Isaiah Wilson's edit had him wearing the Georgia helmet.
So listen, do with that what you will. I think that's mostly tongue-in-cheek from Jeff, but it certainly gives Georgia fans something to think about. And then quickly, one final recruiting note as we kind of lay the groundwork for how things are going to go between now and Wednesday to mention. The other name that's out there, and this was a new name for many of us a few weeks ago, that's the tight end Brett Seither. Obviously, Seither is in the conversation because that represents a position of need for Georgia. But just how much of a need is it? Can a freshman incoming match what Georgia needs here, which is a tight end to mostly be a blocker in 2 tight end sets? Georgia's obviously flirted with the transfer market. Georgia's also got some pretty intriguing prospects already on campus with this. So the question that comes to Jeff from a commenter, and really my curiosity as well, we know that Brett Seither is a good prospect, but is he a good enough prospect for Georgia that they would definitely take him if Seither's willing to say yes? Recruiting's obviously complicated business. Georgia's got a lot to think about when it comes to its tight end position, and Jeff kind of laid it down, the sort of candid facts as we think we know them with Georgia's tight end situation right now. I also thought this was interesting.
I think a few stream of consciousness thoughts here are, A, should perhaps we have put Eli Wolf's name on the 2019 targets? Probably not, since he's a graduate transfer. Can Georgia get 1 year out of him? What if all these people say yes? Is Seither one of those guys that they take a yes from? Remember this, folks. Everybody thinks about tight ends, and Georgia needs 4 or 5 of them. First game of the year last year, Jim Chaney and Sam Pittman smacked a number 42 jersey on Cade Mays, and they said, son, go out there and block guys on the edge and play tight end. I think that's what Georgia could do if they want to sit there and penny pinch with scholarships.
And the truth is, the scenario that Jeff lays out there is the one that I would probably prefer. I've said before, the DawgNation Daily endorsement right now goes towards giving tight ends currently on the roster a chance. John Fitzpatrick we like around here. Rylan Goede we think we're going to like once he's recovered from injury. We want to give those guys a chance. But if it really is just that second blocking tight end, I got no problem with that being a third offensive tackle. Getting some guy on the field, giving him a chance to do that. I'm more than fine with all of that. Let me see if I can sum all this up really quickly, though, before we move on. It's a fun, wild ride between now and next Wednesday. Georgia might get a couple defensive backs, might be able to add that wide receiver, depending on how that weird situation goes with attempting to flip Pickens from Auburn. Maybe there's a tight end that fits into all this. This is really fun for me. I hope it is for you. Georgia may not get exactly everything it wants next Wednesday, but it certainly seems that it's heading towards a pretty fun conclusion that makes Dog fans feel pretty good about this 2019 class. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hello to you. Thanks for being with us. Live on video today, 10 a.m. on all the DawgNation video channels, DawgNation, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. And by the way, we've heard from some of our Twitter audience say, you got to start showing a little more love to the Twitter side of things. So we'll certainly look forward to doing that in the days to come. We're also available on the radio at noon in Athens, on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Rep, and as a podcast, pretty much wherever you can find podcasts. We appreciate you finding DawgNation Daily here today. Later on in the program, as I said, there'll be Sony Michel. You'll get a chance to hear his thoughts about the build-up towards the Super Bowl on Sunday, where his mindset is in all of this. And that's going to be a really fun conversation to have with Sony coming up in just a few minutes. Also, our good friend Tony Barnhart going to be with us as well. The guy known as Mr. College Football, one of the great voices around the sport, a real expert. And we're having some fun with Tony, a friend of the program, in just a couple of minutes, too. Before that, though, let's go around the doghouse here today, brought to you by Online Trading Academy. And I mentioned this very briefly yesterday. I like when ESPN takes its way too early top 25 and looks at, storylines kind of matching all those top 25 teams. And one of the things they did on the site this week was look at reasons for optimism for all of its way too early top 25 teams. Now, for the most part, Georgia fans aren't interested in why Alabama or Clemson or someone like that's optimistic. They're interested in what their own reasons for optimism are. And I always like it when you can go outside the bubble of DawgNation for something like this and find out what people are saying. And Alex Scarborough, writing this portion for ESPN.com, really highlights the Georgia defense. Let me let you hear a little bit of what Scarborough writes here. He says there are a few key seniors moving on. That's indeed true. But Scarborough says don't be surprised if the defense actually improves next season. Only DeAndre Baker is leaving a secondary that has a couple of nice anchors in J.R. Reed and Richard LeCount. Monty Rice might be the only sure thing returning at linebacker, but the addition of the number 2 overall prospect in the 2019 class, Nolan Smith, could give Coach Kirby Smart a plug-and-play pass rusher. So I think it's interesting to hear ESPN saying that it believes that the Georgia defense may be the number one reason for optimism with the program. What's partially interesting about that is when it comes to optimism, I don't know that Kirby Smart always shared that about his unit in 2018. In fact, go back to the week of the SEC championship game, really the end of the season for Georgia. But if you hear Kirby Smart talk, he wasn't even sure what kind of defense he had even at the end of last year. This is candid, but it's also probably true. Kirby Smart on his thoughts about his defense that now ESPN thinks is a big reason for optimism in 2019.
I've commented all year we're work in progress, and progress is about over. So the season's coming to an end, and we're still in work in progress. We've got to show improvement.
So isn't that funny? ESPN says, hey, the defense for Georgia, the guys that it brings back from the 2018 side of things, the guys that it's adding for 2019, those may be the biggest reasons for Dog fans to feel good about next season. And Kirby Smart pumps the brakes and say, well, hold on, I'm not even sure I felt great at the end of last year. I felt like my unit was still a little bit of a work in progress. I think what this all comes down to, what ESPN expects from the Georgia defense, what Kirby Smart demands from the Georgia defense, it comes down to a simple word. And Kirby Smart's used this before. It's the idea of domination. Not just being good, not just keeping teams out of the end zone, but actually impacting in the backfield with tackles for loss and sacks and making impactful plays. That's what Kirby Smart challenged his defense to do before the 2017 season. And what Kirby said then, I think, will echo in 2019 as he looks to build a defense that's not just good, but has the potential to be great. In fact, here is, I believe, what Kirby will say to this unit going into this spring when it has a chance to be so impactful in 2019.
As much as you guys want to say they're all talented and they're all this and that, until they actually prove it and they go out on the field and they dominate, I'm not going to be happy with their performance because I think that they should do that.
Listen, I think dominate's a really interesting word. It's obviously easier said than done, but when you take a look at the collection of talent that ESPN says Georgia has, I think ESPN's making an accurate assessment of that. You got to do more than just keep teams out of the end zone. You got to do more than just rank somewhere near the top 10 of the defensive efficiency metrics. You got to go out and find a lot more sacks than this program's been able to find, a lot more tackles for loss. You've got to wreak more havoc, and you've got to be the reason why Georgia returns back to college football playoff. I think that'll be really interesting to see. Around the Doghouse, as I said, is brought to you by Online Trading Academy, which provides professional instruction on how you can make money in the markets. And the great news about that is that's when the market moves in either direction. You can do that. Students to Online Trading Academy learn step-by-step approaches to trading and investing. The classes cover a spectrum of trading styles and asset classes. It's in the classroom and it's online. You can't beat that. So make the best decision you could make by investing in yourself today. Simply go to tradingacademy.com/Atlanta. That website, once again, tradingacademy.com/Atlanta. It's Sony Michel later on. It's our good friend Tony Barnhart right now. I do love when we get a chance to talk to Tony Barnhart here on DawgNation Daily. This guy I've been reading for a long time, and a terrific voice around college football. And a guy we had some fun with earlier in the week because he goes on the Feinbaum Show, I guess it was last week now, and he ranks his top 15 Georgia running backs of all time. Tony, I look forward to getting into that with you here coming up in a couple of moments. But before that, though, let me just say welcome back to the program. We really appreciate you being with us.
Glad to be with you, Brandon, always.
Well, it's going to be a fun conversation. And before we get into the running back stuff, because I am genuinely interested in your opinion on that, let me talk to you about something I was just discussing. When you look at the transition for Georgia in 2019, as it tries to establish somewhat of a new identity, I mean, on the one hand, offensively, this is Jake Fromm's team now. He's not sharing quarterback duties with anybody else. He is the quarterback, and with a new offensive coordinator, they're probably going to build around him a little bit more. But you do have voices like ESPN that says the real strength of this Georgia team next season is going to be its defense. If Georgia returns to the college football playoff next season, Tony, what do you think is going to lead the way in that regard?
I still think while the defense is going to be good, I still think it comes down to DeAndre Swift and Jake Fromm and finding big play receivers. I think DeAndre Swift has a chance to be the best running back in the country, and really from the LSU game on last year, Fromm was, I thought, magnificent. So yes, the defense will still be good, but I think those two guys and an improved offensive line are going to sort of lead the way.
So since you bring that up, let me go down that road with you for a minute, because it's really interesting to hear Georgia fans talk, from week-to-week basis, because if you look at the overall stats, the Georgia offense last season was really good, whether it be the old school, yards and points, or the new school offensive efficiency metrics. Georgia ranked really highly in both of those. And yet, Tony, as you're well aware, there are a lot of Georgia fans who will point to specific moments, the failure at LSU, or some of the issues and other big games that Georgia might have played, where the offense did not look as consistent as it had, for the other earlier parts of the season. Can Georgia add that extra passing game, dimension, the wide receiver, more from Jake Fromm, to an offense that's always going to be largely based around the run? Can you really do both? Because that certainly seems like what Georgia needs to do.
No, you can do both. I mean, if you run the ball effectively, the play-action passing game should be there, assuming you've got the talent, and Georgia does. So Georgia is not going to be a heavy RPO, spread out. That's not what they do. They want to run the ball, and when we look at the great list of Georgia running backs, it's been that way for a long time. But you can still open up the offense with the play-action passing game if you got a quarterback, and Georgia does, and if you have the receivers, and Georgia does.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, and I think it's going to be really fun to watch that play out coming up this season. All right, so let's talk about the running backs here for a moment. Obviously, this is top of mind for many people because Gurley and Michel are both in the Super Bowl on Sunday, and this is something that Georgia's been trying to build as its reputation for quite some time. For the people who aren't fully acquainted with this discussion, let me show you a tweet from the Feinbaum Show for those watching on video. This is Tony's top 15. No one disputes Herschel at number 1. You got Trippy at number 2, the legendary former running back Charlie Trippy. Then it's Nick Chubb at 3, Frank Sinkwich, the former Heisman Trophy winner, at number 4, and Todd Gurley at number 5. Let me deal, Tony, with that top 5 here just for a moment, because the one thing I've heard from a lot of Georgia fans in the moments in which we've brought this ranking up and had some fun with it is that it seems to be almost a pretty strong consensus from maybe the newer breed of Georgia fan that Gurley might be the second best back this school has produced. Now, he's not a Heisman winner like Frank Sinkwich, wasn't a former number 1 pick the way that Trippy was, but the highlights, the dazzling plays kind of speak for themselves. He's arguably on the very short list of best players in the NFL at the moment. There are a lot of Georgia fans who think Gurley should have been number 2 on this list. What kind of feedback did you get about that?
Well, yeah, I got that feedback a ton, and I thought there was no doubt in my mind that Herschel was going to be number 1 and Charlie Trippy was going to be number 2. After that, I can take any argument for any player anywhere. But there's no question that from an NFL standpoint and a talent standpoint, Gurley is a magnificent player. He really is, and so I have no problem. I had no problem putting him 3, but trust me, like a lot of people, I've done my homework on Charlie Trippy. He's the second greatest player to ever play at Georgia.
Well, yeah, listen, that's the career that he had speaks for itself on that. And I thought it was interesting to see Chubb as high as he was. Obviously, there's plenty of reason to understand that. But, Tony, I've sort of made the case when it comes to Nick Chubb that it's almost as if he leaves his Georgia career, I believe, somewhat underrated because, Michel gets drafted higher. There were some people that weren't sure how Chubb's game was going to translate to the NFL. As it turns out, he's right at home in the league with the Cleveland Browns. And, because he shared some of the spotlight with Sony Michel and because he dealt with a pretty serious injury in 2015, I think there's a pocket of Georgia fans that almost forgot how good Chubb really was because, sometimes it seemed like the more dazzling highlights belonged to Michel than Chubb. I was actually really glad to see you rank Chubb as high as you did because I think that's a more appropriate assessment of what his career at Georgia was, and it's almost like it's hard to be underrated when you are as revered as Chubb is, but in this rarefied air category, it almost seems like, sometimes Chubb doesn't get as much attention as I think he should.
Well, the number 2, the number 2 rusher in the history of a school that's produced a lot of great running backs. And people forget how dominant he was before he tore up his knee at Tennessee. He was just killing people, but he still turned into an incredibly strong back. I just think it's a magnificent story for Chuck because I remember that day all too well when they took him off the field in Knoxville, and there were people who were worried about him walking again properly, much less football. And I think he deserves to be there because of what he's overcome.
We're going to talk about a couple different subjects in a minute. Let me do one more thing on the running backs for a moment. If we don't mind, let's show that graphic one more time of where the rankings are for these top 15 according to Tony Barnhart. He does this initially on the Feinbaum show. We had some fun with this. I love seeing Garrison Hurst as high as he is. I think that Hurst should have won the Heisman in '92. I might, kind of squabble with you a little bit on Terrell Davis being ranked as high as he is, given that most of his success came at the NFL level. I think my biggest problem, though, Tony, in terms of how these are ranked, and as you said, listen, it's very hard to come up with a full ranking of all this, is the name that's not on this top 15 that I definitely think should be, and that's Robert Edwards. Edwards pre-injury, I thought, was a dazzling back. 5 touchdowns in a game in '95, a dominant player for Georgia in '97, a first-round draft pick before getting hurt. Edwards not being on this top 15, I think you got to make some room for him there.
Well, if it had been 16, he was the number 16 on the list. It came down between him and Kevin McLeod. Kevin McLeod's the number 10 rusher in Georgia history. All SEC pick. Georgia won the SEC championship. And in retrospect, I wish I'd have insisted. USA Today originally called me to ask me to do this.
Okay.
And I should have insisted that Robert Edwards be included at number 16. So I got plenty of feedback. Robert Edwards used to be the head coach of my high school, so I have nothing but respect for him.
Well, you know how it is, Tony. Those of us who love college football lists. So if you create one of these lists, you're going to give us some stuff to talk about, and we're going to chew on that for weeks and weeks. We just can't get enough of this kind of stuff. But, it obviously is top of mind, as I said, because of the presence of the Super Bowl, Michel and Gurley in there. Tony, I was there on Monday for the opening night festivities when the week in Atlanta kind of gets kicked off, and I really was amazed by how much of a commercial it turned out to be for UGA. You have Belichick saying what he said. David Boss Andrews was obviously talking a lot about this. Gurley and Michel, their performances kind of speak for themselves. They're both somewhat soft-spoken guys, but their actions do the talking for them. I mean, can you put into words just what it means for Georgia to be back in this game again, have another alumnus playing in this game? It really seems to really grow the Georgia brand, and I'm sure you would agree with that.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's great exposure for the University of Georgia to have high-profile players like this. Georgia's got, on the complete rosters, Georgia's got 4 players total, which is more than any other single school in the SEC. So, yeah, I think it's a big, and it never hurts to have Bill Belichick say, Kirby's program is really good at developing NFL players. That never hurts.
Yeah, listen, for sure. Let me do 2 serious issues with you before we let you go. And I've said this before, Tony. I'm a hypocrite on this because as a Georgia fan, I want Georgia to be shopping in the transfer portal all the time. And I'm looking at those guys all the time saying, ooh, is this someone that could help Georgia, and is this someone that Georgia could get? And yet if a Georgia player goes in the transfer portal, then all of a sudden I start thinking about the damage this is doing to the institution of college football. I mean, from a more objective perspective, as this new threshold gets crossed, transfer portal era, does this have a danger of being bad for college football, the rampant transfers we're seeing and are about to see even more of?
Well, I think it's a net positive, but right now with the portal, first of all, I wish we didn't call it a portal. I wish we'd call it a database or something like that, but that's another issue. It's a little bit of a Wild Wild West deal right now because nobody knows kind of like where it's going to lead. The key thing is what is going to happen now, and I wrote about this yesterday, is that more and more guys who are going to transfer are going to ask for waivers of the residency rule, the sitting out a year rule. Obviously, that's what Justin Fields is doing. That's what Tate Martell is doing. And so the question becomes, if the NCAA grants these waivers and just lets it become football free agency, then it gets kind of wild and crazy. So I'm watching the Justin Fields waiver application. I'm watching the Tate. I think the Tate Martell thing is I think Justin Fields is going to get his waiver. I think the situation, while it's not fair to the University of Georgia, I think he's going to get the waiver. The Tate Martell thing, I think, is more problematic because there's no extraordinary circumstance there that, at least that I'm aware of. And so, but keep your eye on these waivers. The waivers will determine whether or not the portal is good or bad for college football.
Let me do one more thing with you before we let you go, and this is kind of off the subject of Georgia, and maybe this is nothing, maybe it's something, but, Tony, this is 2 consecutive years that Alabama has had massive turnover with its coaching staff, and I think there's a way of looking at this that almost feels like an overreaction both times. The 2018 staff was built, I believe, around the fact that Georgia had beaten out Alabama for the #1 recruiting class, and all of a sudden all these recruiters either got promoted or brought in, and then Saban decided, I don't like the personality this staff has on game days, so therefore I'm going to replenish my staff with guys like Butch Jones and Steve Sarkisian, all these guys that have been Kyle Flood, all these guys who've been Kyle Flood, these guys who've been head coaches before. Is this too much overreaction? Is this an example of Saban just being really smart and being really nimble, or does this feel like I don't know, a degree of too much micromanaging from Saban, because obviously the results of the national championship game weren't great?
No. The results of the national championship game, Alabama got beat by a better football team that was better prepared than they were. And that there's no. I read somewhere where one of the players said they were mentally tired. I don't buy that at all. But to your question, Nick Saban's making these changes obviously because he has to. I just think if you've got the talent on your roster, and I look at that Alabama roster, and I'm going, they got plenty of players. I think the coaching thing is frankly overblown. Now, when the coaching thing results in recruiting starting to slip, that's when it's an issue. But if you look back, their recruiting classes have been ranked 1, class 4 have been 1, 1, 6, and 1. And so that's not bad.
Yeah, listen, most programs would be very happy with that for sure. Tony, great stuff as always. For the people who want more of your work and kind of want to find your perspective on college football, how can we find you online?
I write for a website. I went into business with 3 of my old newspaper buddies called TMG. TMG stands for the Media Guides, TMGcollegesports.com. We've got a guy in L.A., a guy in Chicago, and a guy in Boston. Of course, I'm here in Atlanta. And so during the off-season, I write at least once a week at TMGcollegesports.com. I've got a column up there now talking about how I believe the Tate Martell waiver application, if granted, could change college football forever.
Hey, I've seen that column. It's a terrific column. It's a great website. Tony, thanks for your time, and we'll look forward to speaking to you on DawgNation Daily very soon.
Okay, Brandon. Take care.
Good stuff there from Tony Barnhart. And, like I said, I've seen his piece on Tate Martell. You ought to check it out for yourself online. I do think that it's kind of an interesting look on this. The Fields thing seems like it's just going to go down the road of, no one's going to really put up much of a fight for Fields being granted immediate eligibility. Tony then looks at the Tate Martell situation where the extenuating circumstance, and from Tony's perspective, is a little harder to conjure up, that maybe the Martell thing is more of a harbinger of what the rest of college football is going to look like. Now, maybe I'm wrong on this. I don't think the NCAA is going to pump the brakes on Fields or Martell on anybody. I think for a little while they're going to let this just be the Wild West and see where it goes, because I think the NCAA is nervous, but it's public perception, and this is a way of changing that conversation. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I think for now the NCAA is going to be comfortable being, very much the Wild West, and then kind of seeing where it goes from there. But certainly we are definitely in uncharted waters when it comes to college football.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
It's fun to catch up with Tony Barnhart, and I appreciate him having some fun with us on that ranking of the top 15 Georgia running backs. I like that kind of stuff. It's obviously not, too serious or, the kind of thing where only one opinion can be right, but we do like sharing our opinions on stuff like that. And one of the things I said earlier when it came up on the show earlier this week is, for someone like me that came of age in the 80s and the 90s, it's kind of fun to go back and look at some of those names again. The No-Sean Marinos and, guys like that, Garrison Hurst, Robert Edwards, those back in the 80s with, Worley and Hampton. Those were influential, players in my lifetime growing up, and it's kind of fun to get a chance to sort of figure out how they fit into the conversation of what truly has made Georgia running back university. I'm really glad we got a chance to do that. By the way, don't forget the big game is on Sunday, and you want to be involved in the action. If you're at your party, your neighborhood, or wherever you're going, a lot of folks are going to be talking about their own bets and their own plays for the game. You want to have some too, and you want to get involved with my friends at MyBookie. Now, my understanding is MyBookie's got something in the neighborhood of about 200 prop bets up right now. If you've never done a prop bet before, those are really fun. This is not just the point spread or the point total or anything like that. These are specific questions. For instance, who's going to have more rushing yards between Sony Michel and Todd Gurley? These are just fun ways to make the game a little more interesting. And I think tomorrow, we normally do our MyBookie Best Bets on Thursday. I think we're actually going to wait and do MyBookie Best Bets tomorrow, kind of dive into some of these props a little bit. We won't do a ton on that, but at least a couple that catch my eye, we'll do that. I will say the closer we get to the big game, the more I do like the Rams, and I kind of like them a lot, which, you should do with that what you will. Maybe you fade that, but nonetheless, that's kind of where I am at the moment. I kind of like L.A., and then tomorrow we'll talk a little bit more deeply about that and some of the prop bets that I'm also interested in, too. As we transition to our SEC through, by the way, don't forget, Sony Michel coming up in a couple of minutes. But as we transition to our SEC through, I want to mention what Tony Barnhart also addressed a moment ago, that a former Alabama running back, Josh Jacobs, does an interview where, he talks about Alabama not being focused and not being attentive going in the national championship game, that the energy level wasn't there, that it wasn't the same Alabama that, we're used to seeing in big games like this. And boy, I tell you, that is an eye-opener for me. If that's really true, then I think it speaks to a situation with Nick Saban where, and I hate to say it like this, but it almost comes across as, are they just kind of grasping at straws for what they want to be? Well, we bring in these recruiters and that doesn't work, or at least to the tune of a national championship. Now we're going to switch over and go to these coaches and that doesn't work. And listen, they're Alabama fans who watch and listen to the show from time to time. The one they're going to point back and say was, yeah, BA, they still beat Georgia the last 2 years. And I would say that's fine and well, and that's certainly true. Nick Saban, a veteran in the coaching ranks at this point in time. Kirby Smart, just 3 years into the business. It seems like he's already closed the gap pretty well here. And I don't think you hear a lot of, Georgia players after national championship games saying weren't focused and weren't, attentive. It's one thing, I guess, to do that for the Sugar Bowl. It's another thing to do that for the national championship game. Yeah, sometimes these kinds of statements are just the typical excuse-making that comes after a loss. You don't really know what happened, so you got to say something, so this is what you say. But, man, I think this really speaks to the way in which that Nick Saban has micromanaged that Alabama program, and you start to wonder, is every button he's pushing working out the way that he wants it to if you've got former running backs saying these kinds of things in conversations? Just something to think about. One of the things that Alabama does typically do pretty well, though, is bring in staff members to kind of round out not just the coaching staff, but the analyst ranks as well. And one of the guys, I guess, that's close to being in an official role there is Mike Stoops, the former Oklahoma defensive coordinator, could be coming in. And I've said this before, a lot of times people have a hard time understanding what analysts really do. They're not on-field coaches, so therefore how important are they? It almost seems like a joke. Schools like Alabama and really even Georgia too have so many of them, it almost seems like they're building an army more so than a coaching staff. I think these kinds of things do matter. And the schools that are willing to spend money on this and use their reputation, obviously Alabama is a rehabilitation center for a lot of these ex-fired coaches. When you use that to your advantage, I think it really helps. In fact, it's not just Stoops. I guess Major Applewhite, the former Alabama offensive coordinator who became a failed head coach at Houston, he's potentially in the mix here too for an analyst role. I think this kind of stuff, the more hands you have on deck helping with game plan preparation, it just makes you harder to beat. And this is one of the ways in which you can spend money and see a real return on that investment. So Alabama's doing that. A couple other stories to get to. Looks like Ed Orgeron's close to signing a contract extension to LSU. No surprise there, but it is an opportunity for me to admit something. Orgeron is one of those guys that I've just turned out to be wrong about. Orgeron is a guy I've had great questions about, and it wasn't just the on-field coaching stuff and the kind of erratic demeanor. It was his ability to recruit. Really until this 2019 class came together, I looked at what I thought were some high-profile misses for Orgeron that an LSU coach shouldn't have. Now, there's still a chance he doesn't get Ishmael Sopsher, the big defensive lineman that's still out there. There's still a chance he may miss on him, and they missed on some guys in 2018, 2017, whatever. But this is a guy, for the most part, that has turned out to be a really good architect of the LSU program. They had a great recruiting class, I thought, in 2019, and I think they're a threat in the SEC West in 2019 on the field. So you can't get them all right. The Orgeron administration, I thought, was doomed. As it turns out, that's probably on pretty good footing here going into 2019. One more to mention. Somebody sent this to me on Twitter. Tavin Richardson, starting Kentucky wide receiver, has put his name in the transfer portal. So somebody said to me, maybe not everybody's thrilled to have Eddie Gran back at the University of Kentucky. Very run-happy a year ago. Maybe Tavin Richardson sees an opportunity to go out and play somewhere else. But nonetheless, we'll make that your SEC through for right now. And here on DawgNation Daily, as I promised you earlier, boy, I love the chance to catch up with Sony Michel a little earlier this week. We did have him for DawgNation Appreciation a little less than a year ago, and at that point in time, he was just looking ahead to going into the NFL. And who would have ever imagined then that first year would work out as well as it has? Got put into a perfect situation with New England, and the Patriots have done, once again, what the Patriots do, which is put themselves on the biggest stage in football, and that stage on Sunday is going to feature Michel in a huge role. How does it feel to be that guy, and what does he still think about Georgia? Here is our conversation with Sony Michel on that and so much more.
It's been a wonderful experience, a lot of ups and downs, but, that's how you grow.
We saw a big performance from you in the AFC Championship game. It reminds many people of the big performance you had in the Rose Bowl. Do you think you learned about playing in big games and moments like that at the end of the 2017 season?
I would just say, it's the preparation. The preparation and practice would help me be able to bring it to the game field.
And now we're in a situation in Georgia where, Elijah Holyfield stepped in for you and Nick, had a great year. Now he's gone. What advice would you give to someone like, say, Zamir White coming back from injury or James Cook looking to step up to kind of, maintain that legacy of really good running backs at Georgia?
Just keep working hard.
How much do you still get a chance to talk to Kirby Smart and that staff there? How connected have you remained with Georgia?
I've talked to them throughout the year. I know they have a busy season, same as me. But I try to stay connected as much as I can.
What do you think about the change over to James Coley as offensive coordinator now?
If they're going with James Coley, I'm going with James Coley too.
Earlier, Todd Gurley, wants to treat you like an opponent right now. I guess y'all be friends again after the game. What's your, attitude about seeing another Georgia running back on the other side?
I'm excited for him. He worked his whole life for this moment, and I'm sure he's gonna go out there and do his thing.
Well, certainly, I know you must feel that Georgia fans are behind you and really proud to see you in the game. Have you sensed that being back here in the state of Georgia?
Yeah, you always can feel the dog presence, and I appreciate it, and I'm always appreciate them.
You almost feel sorry for Sony a little bit. You had to be there to kind of understand this. So the backstory to Super Bowl opening night, which we were at on Monday, is team captains and selected veterans, they get podiums, and so they're sitting at a desk kind of like I'm sitting at right now, and there's a fence that keeps the media from getting too close. But if you're a rookie running back on the New England Patriots, even back in the, what's your de facto home state of Georgia, you don't get that same kind of treatment. So poor Sony was just out in the middle of the floor of State Farm Arena, and when I tell you that he had a throng of people surrounding him on all sides, and it's one of these things where everybody's tugging him on the shoulder, and he spins in one direction to one interview, then he spins in another direction to another interview, and he's just going round and round in circles, and you get all these goofballs asking all these, comedic type questions, trying to get, a funny moment they can put on a viral video, and, he's just I imagine so much shell-shocked by all of this. Sony is one of those guys anyway that's a little bit soft-spoken, and, he's never really, asked for a lot of attention on himself, but on this night, he had people coming to him from everywhere because it's really the perfect storm of, in Georgia, guys like me want to talk to him about his Georgia career, and there were a lot of people like that in the room, but he's also the, one of the top rushers for the Patriots, so you got plenty of people who want to ask him the Super Bowl-centric questions and the, question about the Rams and questions about all that. So props to Sony Michel for handling it all like a pro and dealing with all the onslaught of attention that came his way as we get closer to game time on Sunday. I'm sure he and Todd Gurley and the rest of these players are just ready to kind of button this thing up and make it more about football and not have to worry about guys like me sticking microphones in their face. Okay, well, we will get ready to wrap up today's program, and we will do so by reminding you once again that around here we have a mission that we try to accomplish. And we feel like we've done a pretty good job over that over the last couple of years. That's letting Georgia fans know that the way to be a good Georgia fan is to always be a Gator hater. Those lousy, stinking Gators, we don't have much love for around here. But something we do love, the fact that it's now been 824 days since that bunch has beaten the University of Georgia, and we'll look forward to climbing that number throughout the offseason and then tacking on a whole nother year of that come October of 2019. That's going to be a lot of fun. I'll also wrap up today's program by saying good luck to the Lady Dogs tonight as they try to get back to their winning ways. Love to see Joni Taylor's squad go out and find a W tonight. We'll talk more about that as we can, but Lady Dogs tonight. And then us back tomorrow morning at 10 a.m., and I believe we're going to have a surprise tomorrow. I can't tell you too much about it yet, but check in tomorrow for a pretty fun surprise. We'll see you then. All right, on video, we will take some of your comments right now. By the way, props to our buddy Connor Riley, who ran the whole thing by himself today. An auteur, if you will. He's almost like, I'm going to date myself by saying this, but like the old David Letterman show when Paul Schaefer would play like 2 keyboards at once. You got, Connor Riley back there playing multiple keyboards. So props for him for doing all of that. We appreciate that. Robert Barnes says he's looking forward to seeing Jacob Eason play next season. Yeah, I am. I'm kind of excited about that too. Looking forward to seeing what Eason brings to the table. I think that could be really interesting. Andrew Howell reminds us the Lady Dogs tonight, 8 p.m. on the Watch ESPN app. Yeah, it's at Arkansas. Am I right about that? At Arkansas for the Lady Dogs. So 8 p.m. tonight Eastern time on the Watch ESPN app. Good luck to Joni Taylor's crew. Let me go over to YouTube here, get that fired up as well. And then pretty soon we are going to get the Twitter comments up and running also. We got to do a better job at that. We got called out for that, and we should have been. Bulldog Chris says 2019 UJ is going to sweep the East, best the West, and get a playoff payoff. I like that, Chris. That's for sure. I like that a lot. Ashim Spike says, I'm sure Sony won't need a therapist. I got to tell you, though, I deal with a little bit of claustrophobia as it is. And in a room like that, I'm starting to get a little nervous, and people aren't really crowding around me. I'm just having a hard time getting away from them. I can only stay in these scrums for so long before I have to step out and kind of get some fresh air. Can you imagine being Sony where everyone's gathered around you the entire time? Boy, that's pretty rough. That is pretty rough. Clip Payne says, predictions on who UG ends up taking next Wednesday. I've got Pickens, Cross, and Elam. I guess I might go, boy, I don't know. I would have Elam in my class for sure. That to the extent that I make official predictions, that would be one. I don't know that I feel good enough yet about Cross or Elam to make that statement. I'm sorry, Cross or Pickens to make that statement. Y'all know that I really want Pickens, but I don't know that I can make that statement as of yet. Ty Middlebrook says, what's going on with our softball team? In 2020, Georgia has 5 of the top players in the country, and none are going to UGA. I've heard that before. Now, the truth is, I don't know the first thing about any of that kind of stuff. But I have heard that Georgia's a big state for softball, and that even though Georgia's got, like a top 25 program, that these players frequently don't go to Georgia. The truth is, I don't really know anything about that, but I have heard that before. Shane Yelvington says that Elam is going to Florida. I know that that Florida fans still feel pretty confident about that, but I don't know. I know Florida fans would like to think that, but you heard Jeff Sentell earlier, and I guess I'm going to go with what Jeff's saying for right now. Let me go back over to Facebook for a moment. Matt Rugavino says, so is Georgia even looking for a defensive coordinator anymore? Yeah, maybe this is one of those things where it's going to stretch out forever and forever, and maybe Georgia's going to decide they don't need one. I still am mostly of the belief that the reason for lack of announcements mostly just procedural. I don't think there's anything all that crazy afoot. I just think it's just the kind of thing they're just choosing to do, and eventually they will they'll make that announcement. They may make it on signing day. I think if Kirby really wanted to troll people, he would he'd not make it on signing day, because at that point in time, people are going to really start asking some questions. John William Adams asked an interesting question. He says, more important by need, a receiver or running back in 2019 after tight end? For 2019, I'd say it's a receiver. I would. For 2020, I think that Georgia's got to really get back into the elite, Marshawn Lloyd, Zachary Evans, Kendall Milton style running back, 5-star variety. For 2020, that becomes a big need for me. For 2019, if I could add one more player to this mix, a George Pickens would be really exciting for me there. Philip Jordan Wells says Jeff gave away some body language clues on Elam yesterday. Plus, there's some nuggets in the DawgNation forums too. Yeah, you got to check that DawgNation forum. That's a good place to go to get some free intel, which is always nice. And yeah, listen, I'm right there with you on the reading of the body language when it comes to Jeff. But plus, the actual overall statement doesn't require a lot of body language reading. Jeff said he thought that George was in a pretty good spot there. Over here on YouTube, let me get Chiming Dog. Let's see what Chiming has to say. Chiming Dog says it's actually a pretty good strategy. He says, don't tell anybody who the defensive coordinator is. That way that person can't be hired away. It's almost like you keep it a secret to not really know where the real decisions are coming from. I think that's kind of funny. Rob Brazy on the subject of trolls. Yeah, you listen, you got to ignore those. Here's my issue with when it comes to opposing fans. We've got some opposing fans who watch the show and literally chime in on the conversation, and I always find that to be a value add. If you're a fan of another team and you come in and say, hey, as a non-Georgia fan, I actually feel fill in the blank, that to me can further the conversation. There are some people who choose to do that. There are other people who kind of choose to come in here and just sort of, poke at people and see what they can get away with. Those are the kinds of people that I would, just invite you to ignore. And I think on YouTube, y'all know the technology probably better than I do. I think it's actually pretty easy to do that. So that'd be my advice. K9 Blue says, BA, I'm love seeing you excited about Pickens as I am. He'll be a true game changer when eligible. Yeah, I mean, I thought that Tony Barnhart was right about this, that there's no reason why you can't also be an explosive passing offense with the running offense that Georgia has. I think this is a way in which Georgia's been negatively recruited, and I don't think the actual facts match up with that. And I think the one thing that Georgia really needs is that dominant receiver to show people how it can really look when you've got both those complements working together. The big offensive line, the running game to go along with the wide receiver. I think that's an absolute possibility, and I think that Pickens could be that guy. Y'all know, if you want to go back to, previous iteration of this program, I talked a lot about Jaden Hazelwood then. I, still believe that Hazelwood could have been an impact player for Georgia. He made his choice. I've kind of moved on. Many of you have moved on as well. And the other guy that's now available for Georgia that could do some of those things is George Pickens. If he's going to be eligible, I would really like him. And like I said, it's not my place to talk about the academics part of this. I mean, these are still high school kids. They deserve a little bit of, anonymity and privacy as they work through whatever that is. Plus, who am I to say what's real and what's not when it comes to that kind of stuff anyway? But assuming that the classroom stuff gets taken care of, we already know what he can do in a football field because there's no shortage of highlights that show that. Ty Middlebrook says, trolls just wish they had a 365 coverage like we do with BA and Jeff. No other team has our great coverage. First of all, Ty, I really appreciate that compliment. It's incredibly nice for you to say. And it is true. DawgNation Daily's been around for a while now. We have grown to a pretty sizable audience, and that's going to get some attention from people on the outside who wonder, kind of what all the fuss is about. And it's really not me. It's the collection of Georgia fans who gather under this umbrella to talk that has really made it what it is, and people are going to want to know more about that. It's going to attract some outsiders because, who are these people that get together and do this every single day? Johnny Lester says, I think that Pickens is an instant mismatch. I think it's a great description, and that's what you really need. There ought to be these one-on-one opportunities because with Georgia, as we've said a million times, you don't have to be, Bum Phillips to understand this, that when you got the running game that Georgia has, teams are going to have to start creeping their safeties closer and closer to stop that kind of stuff. You've got to have those extra guys to go out and stop the run. When you do, that ought to create those one-on-one opportunities for Pickens to demonstrate just how much of a mismatch they really can be. To me, it's really as simple as that. Crow King 123 says, I wish we had more space in this class. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the great places where Georgia is now, is that you're always dealing with does Georgia have room for the players we'd like to see Georgia get, more so than can Georgia get in on some good players? You've kind of done more of the opposite now, which is, how does Georgia find a way to make room for some of those guys who are out there? Mark Cochran says, I think Kirby's trying to build something like the Patriots offense. They want to be good at everything and beat you more than just one way, just more on the run side. Yeah, I mean, the one thing that is always going to be true for college football that's not true for the NFL, There was a really good blog the other day. There's this guy named Ed Fang. It's a blog called The Power Rank. It's, pretty nerdy, but sometimes I like that kind of stuff, even if I'm not smart enough to understand it all. He was talking about how that one of the most predictive stats in the NFL is going to be what's called net passing efficiency. In other words, you take the yards per attempt of your team and you subtract the yards per attempt that you give up. And when you do that, you're going to predict winners of games as much as anything else. It's how efficient are you at throwing the ball, and how much do you prevent efficient throwing against you. And that's going to determine who wins NFL games more than anything else. I think that's a really interesting thing, and he's got plenty of numbers that back that up. College football is never going to quite be that same way. And I won't pretend to fully understand why that is, but the best I can come up with is that college, because of the way that recruiting works and because there are 130 teams as opposed to just 32 teams, you're going to have these gigantic physical mismatches. Even within SEC games, Georgia is physically a mismatch advantage against most of the teams that it plays. Therefore, passing the ball is not quite as important because you have a reliable opportunity to just smash the opponent that you're playing and running the ball. The long-winded point that I'm trying to make here is that running the ball is still way more important in college football than it is in the NFL. There's a lot of research out there, the blog that I just referenced, and plenty of others, that running's actually not that important in the NFL anymore. That how well you throw, how well you defend the pass, that's where the entire action is, and everything else in the league is just window dressing. So the Patriots live in that world. And they're kind of the physical outlier in that world, but they live in that world in a way that Georgia kind of won't, because running the ball is still important. But the overall comparison, what New England has done, where they can be very multiple and really kind of do anything you want, I do think ultimately that's what Kirby Smart's trying to build. But he may have to be a little more, what's the word I'm looking for? Not necessarily creative, but open to things to do that. Sometimes it seems like Kirby gets a little stubbornness in him. I don't know that Belichick's always done that. I think that Belichick's been, pretty willing to, do things a lot of different ways. And I would love to see Georgia continue to grow into that role, of course. I like Ron Willard's comment, who says championships are hard to win, but Kirby has his position to be a perennial threat already. Great position to be in, and keeps enthusiasm peak 365 days a year. I think Ron's absolutely right about that. That when you look at what has happened here over the course of 3 years, the fact that Georgia is on the doorstep as much as it is not a negative, it's a positive. When I go into some of these Alabama radio shows and things like that, I have Alabama fans who try to spin the situation with Georgia of, oh, Georgia's been close, twice. They've been close, 2 years in a row. How many more chances are you going to get? Well, when I look at the situation of Kirby, how young he is, how talented the Georgia roster is, my answer to that question is as many chances as he wants. That if you've already gotten these two in your year 3 of your coaching staff, I don't see any reason right now, barring bad health, why there won't be plenty more of these opportunities to come. So when you look at what Georgia's had, the near misses over the last couple of seasons, that to me is not evidence of a program that can't get over the hump. That's evidence of a program that's getting ready to kick in the door. And I don't just say that because I think that's what you want to hear. I think the overall law of averages speaks for itself on that. And in terms of the 365-day enthusiasm, I think that's really true as well. There is a lot right now for Georgia fans to feel very good about. Very good about. Tyler Arnold says, I think that Dominic Blaylock can be the dominant receiver we need. I'd love to see that be true. I hear Connor Riley's microphone coming on. That means he's getting ready to join us. Connor, your thoughts on the day?
Yeah, to Tyler's comment, I probably have higher expectations of Blaylock, more so than any other freshman coming in, even though he's technically no longer a 5-star wide receiver. I've seen him play in person a few times. I just think Blaylock's a really good football player, and you just need those guys. Like you see it in the NFL draft all the time. Guys like Sony Michel, Alvin Kamara, guys who don't go in the first round because they don't have ideal measurables or athletic traits, but they're just really good football players. And I think Blaylock fits into that. He's a really outstanding football player. This
is a little bit of a weird comparison because I think that Blaylock's more polished as a receiver than the guy I'm about to compare him to. But do you remember when Malcolm Mitchell first came in Georgia? I believe his first game was the 2011 Boise State game. That's a bad game for Georgia, generally speaking. But from the moment that he took the field, you really saw this guy he can do this. He entered Georgia being able to play this position and do this job. As I said, if you go back and watch Mitchell at Valdosta, he was not a full-time receiver. He was almost a player without a position. Played some on defense, did some things on offense. And he really wasn't the best player on that team. Jay Rome was probably the best player on that team. But when he got to Georgia, he just found himself a home, and he was just a receiver from the word go. And Malcolm dealt with some injuries and things like that, but he just entered Georgia with the natural instincts to play the wide receiver position. It would not surprise me if you see some of that from Dominic Blaylock. And, Georgia needs Blaylock to be good, but something's going to tell me that Blaylock, despite the fact that he's not an early enrollee, is going to show up at Georgia just kind of showing that he's got the wherewithal to know how to play this position. Will it be, a dazzling freshman All-American type thing? I don't know. I guess I'm going to withhold predictions like that for the moment, but I don't expect him to be overwhelmed by the moment.
I'm trying to decide which way I want to go. Do I want to go with your Malcolm Mitchell stuff, or I'm gonna correct you on Malcolm Mitchell. One, he was better than Jay Rome. I mean, when you have multiple coaches saying he could have been he was an NFL wide receiver, and had he not, A, torn his ACL in the Clemson game in 2013, and then B, had recurring knee injuries in the NFL, he'd still be a very productive wide receiver for the Patriots. He was making huge catches as a rookie in that 2016 Super Bowl. He was also...
Well, hold on now. You're making a point that I didn't make. I said on that Valdosta team, I thought he was better than Jay Rome. I saw that team play a good bit. Jay Rome was one of the real intriguing high school athletes that I've seen. And, you can say what you want about, beyond that. But, I mean, to me, it was really Rome at the time who was viewed as the real prize for Georgia. And Mitchell was the guy you weren't really quite sure how he's going to fit into the plans at Georgia. When Georgia got Jay Rome, that was viewed as a very big deal.
All I'm going to say is I remember hearing a story of when Mitchell was being recruited, Mike Bobo, I believe, was his primary recruiter, and Kirby Smart, ironically, was his primary recruiter for Alabama. And when Mitchell picked Georgia, I remember hearing a story that Kirby was very, very upset that he did not win that recruiting battle.
Yeah,
and
he knows talent, for sure.
And I will also say Bill Belichick worked him out as a defensive back at Georgia's Pro Day, and there are multiple coaches who thought he also could have been an NFL caliber defensive back.
He was a terrific athlete in high school. There's no doubt about that.
Back to our original point on Blaylock, I think there's a chance for him to step in and sort of do sort of what Terry Godwin, what Mecole Hardman sort of did this year, and sort of fill in that role. And to further that, you sort of asked this. I think he's someone who could play on the outside. I think his route running is already good enough, and while you might worry about the strength on how well he'll hold up physically out there, like Dominic Blaylock is he's coming to Georgia just to play football. He's not coming here to be a big star.
Yeah.
Or
he doesn't want that. He does not want that life. We were with him last week in a room full of people looking at him. He just wasn't drawing attention to himself. He was more than happy to, sit at a table and let other people do the talking, and sit at the table and let other people, talk about him. This is not a guy that's drawing a lot of attention to himself. If I was Dominic Blaylock in a room like we were in last week with the Touchdown Club of Atlanta, I'd be working that room trying to get everything I could for myself. I'd be in love with my own status as, an elite recruit to wide receiver position. Dominic Blaylock is just not that impressed with himself. He's just not.
No, he just wants to go out, play football, and have a good time. And have a good time playing football, and he's very, very good at that.
Nice compliment from Scott Harris, who says he enjoyed the David Andrews interview. Yeah, I loved what Andrews said, and I appreciated his candor about a couple things. So if you haven't seen the David Andrews interview, you need to go do that. One of the things he talked about was the honest admission that there was a chance that he thought his career could have been over when he stopped playing in Georgia. I mean, can you imagine this? There's no certainties, right? I mean, he's been a great starter for Georgia, but he's not really on the radar for the draft. He's an undrafted guy. And then he goes and becomes the captain of the New England Patriots. He's the captain of the team. You watch, a lot of these celebrations that New England's had. He's right there. The first person that Brady's looking to hug and pat on the back when a lot of this is over is Andrews. They've developed a really close relationship with themselves. And one of the things I like from Andrews in that conversation too, and Connor, I don't know if this struck you the same way that it did me, but I asked him, I said, so you go to New England, and Tom Brady is one of the most famous people alive, but you're his center. You have to treat him as just another teammate. I'm always fascinated by that kind of thing of how do you enter a room like that where you've got this person who's legitimately larger than life, and you just learn to treat them as just another person, because you can't stay starstruck and be the center for that guy. And I loved hearing Andrews talk about a lot of that kind of stuff too. You should check it out, D and 90 on the DawgNation video channels from yesterday. But I loved hearing Andrews talk about the process of learning to appreciate Tom Brady as just a guy that he's playing with.
Yeah, I mean, we were there, and I've interviewed Todd Gurley. I've been around plenty of big athletes and stuff like that before. And then you see Tom Brady walk out, and you're kind of like, oh my gosh.
It's just a different kind of thing.
It's just a different kind of thing. Yeah, like we talked about this when Matthew McConaughey was at the Sugar Bowl.
Yeah.
Just like a different kind of fame. Like, oh my gosh, like that's person X, celebrity X there. And Andrews also, he told a really cool story of when he was an undrafted free agent and sort of making his way, trying to make it on that roster, which is, I mean, New England's if you're an undrafted free agent, you go there, you've probably got as good a shot at making a roster as an undrafted free agent, more so than any other place.
It seems like it should be the opposite, but it's probably,
yeah,
it seems like the bad teams would be the chance, but it's a team like that.
They do a really good job of identifying undrafted free agents and guys who fit what they want to do. But Andrews said he had a bunch of buddies that drove down to New Orleans when they were playing the Saints in a preseason game, because they thought it'd be the last time they had a chance to see Andrews play football, and then lo and behold, the next week he's starting at center for the Patriots' first game against the Pittsburgh Steelers.
It's fantastic. I love that, and I would invite you to check out the interview. I think that he's a great ambassador for Georgia, but just a really cool story in his own right. I mean, what an amazing thing to be right there in the middle of all the action for the Super Bowl. That's fantastic. I thought that Anthony Vino Sneed had an interesting comment on Facebook, and I wanted to address. He said, do we really want a guy like Dominic Blaylock to come in and become, a primary receiver for Georgia next season? What does that say about the guys on the Georgia roster who've been waiting their turn? And I hate to default back to Kirby Smart's company line on this, but it does, to me, come down to competition. Of you want the guy that wins that competition. And sometimes newcomers to a program can just leap ahead of guys who've been waiting their turn, But, Connor, I think what Anthony's comment speaks to is, though, there is this curiosity of, Georgia has a lot of receivers, and what are they? We joke about the number of times that Tommy Bush's name comes up here, but, I mean, there are a lot of people who say, well, when you look at the receivers who've done well in college football, physically, Bush looks like those guys. Will he get his chance? I tout for Trey Blunt. I like Trey a lot. I'd love to see Trey on the field more. Somebody else in the comment section a moment ago was talking about Tyler Simmons, who, when he's gotten chances, has kind of shown some flash. I do think that Anthony represents a larger body of Georgia fans who have all decided whichever receiver it is, the guy that's not playing ought to be playing more. To say nothing of Demetrius Robertson, I think we're all curious to see if he can have a much bigger year in 2019 than he had in 2018. But, I mean, what would you say to the conversation of Georgia fans who say there are certain receivers who just haven't been used enough and haven't been used effectively enough?
Dominic Blaylock is the first top 5 wide receiver coming out of high school that Georgia has signed since 2009. I get, that Trey Blunt, Matt Landers, Tommy Bush, those guys are all good players, Tyler Simmons, etc. Blaylock is a talent at the wide receiver position that Georgia has just frankly not had. And, they've developed good receivers, guys like Mitchell, Chris Conley, guys who've gone on to play in the NFL. But coming out of high school, there hasn't been a guy of Blaylock's stature to come to Georgia in a while. And even at Alabama, Alabama, they brought back Jerry Jeudy this year. They brought back Henry Ruggs, Devontae Smith. And arguably one of, if not their most dynamic wide receiver was a freshman, Jalen Waddle, who sort of similar build, even a little bit smaller than Blaylock, and was a lower rated recruit. So, and he was still, granted, he's still a top 50 guy. Just because, I get where the worry is coming from, about all these guys. But, there is partially a reason why they weren't, highly rated, identified as slam dunk, no doubt about it. These guys are going to be star college wide receivers, which I think Blaylock has sort of been tabbed as.
Are you the one that put the comment in the YouTube section about how Georgia's going to finish its class?
I think they get Alam.
No, are you one that asked that question?
No, I'm not. I think it was Jeff.
Okay. Y'all say hello to Jeff in the YouTube comment section, I guess. Jeff over there on YouTube today. So he asked the question of, I think, what was it? He said, if you have 2, who do you get?
Spots, yeah.
As I said before, I feel like I know enough based on, the stuff, that I've, read from Jeff and everything else to say I could confidently put Kyra Lam in that, but I don't know that I feel one way or another about Nick Cross and George Pickens. If you're giving me my choice, I'm going to take Pickens as a personal preference, but do you feel like you know enough about either Cross or Elam to put them in the Georgia class? I'm sorry, Cross or Pickens to put them in the Georgia class right now?
Jeff gave us the option of some grad transfers to possibly include in there for those 2 spots, from a scholarship perspective. So I'm going to say they get Elam. And do you want to go ahead and jump in?
No, finish. Then I got to say something else.
I'm going to say Elam, and I'm going to say Lawrence Cage, or the wide receiver for Miami, who is visiting Georgia this weekend.
So is he trying to tell me that I've only got 2 spots counting grad transfers?
No,
that's
I
not
don't
fair.
Think that's what Jeff's telling you.
That's not.
It's a game. Don't stress out about it. It's just a game. It's an exercise. Have fun.
I mean, if you're telling me I'm only adding 2 players total, grad transfers included, then I'm gonna be pretty disappointed. It's got to be 2 plus a grad transfer, right?
It could be. It could only be 2. They could be trying to load up on that 2020 class and have more spots for that.
I hate having to do math with this kind of stuff. It's my least favorite part about college football is when you have to do like scholarship math. Kristen Phillips says my math needs a little work. Yeah, Kristen, it probably does. K9 Blues asked an interesting question. He asks it to Jeff, but we'll field it nonetheless. He says, is Elam better than Cross at safety by anything but a razor-thin margin, in your opinion? Connor, you watch a lot of film. Do you have any kind of opinion on Elam compared to Cross?
Sort of similar to what we talked about Tyson Campbell. Elam is a more pure corner. And I think you need those more than you would need a good safety.
Yeah, I really do too. I mean, not everybody agrees with me when I say this, but I re-up this from time to time. I think that cornerback is a premium position in college football. I think you have to have really good, true corners to win a national championship, and that's one of the reasons why I like that. Brian McPhail says, leaving a spot for the piano-playing quarterback. Boy, I got to tell you, I hate to be, non-political with my answer, but I just feel like the piano man's had his curtain call.
If I could play Jeff's game and 2 recruits, I would take Elam and I would take Plumlee.
Would you really?
I would.
Wow, that's pretty interesting.
I feel pretty strongly about Plumlee from talking to people who have seen him play, and just sort of UGA's need at the quarterback position. I like Plumlee more than I like Mathis.
So I don't do a lot of like personal evaluation. I just don't trust my own instincts when it comes to stuff like that. So take this with a grain of salt. I don't know that I've seen anything on film from Plumlee that would make me say, oh, I'd rather have him over another guy that is really likely to get on the field somewhere. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I know a lot of Georgia fans like Plumlee a lot, but I can kind of understand why they took Mathis over Plumlee because of the upside. I can kind of understand that. And, I mean...
Well, I don't even know if it's so much as the upside as Georgia needs, like, bodies for spring practice and guys who can come in and play. And, I mean, the thing with Plumlee is, I don't think Georgia anticipated, I don't know if he anticipated, the Fields thing going as sour as quickly as it did. Because that's, if Fields is still here at least through the spring, and to get them through the spring, it does make things a little bit easier with, having Plumlee enroll as a summer enrollee. Because he would have had to, he committed to Georgia in June, he would have had to completely rejigger his schedule so that he could go and graduate early, which you hear about it often, but it's easier said than done for some of these guys.
But when I say higher upside, I mean, I don't think you can deny, maybe you will, sounds like you will, but I don't think you can deny that a tall guy that can run is just a really interesting quarterback prospect. Now, I do think that Math is a bit of a project. I don't think that Math is going to be ready to play next year. I don't. But I think he's an interesting project to take on. Whereas I don't know that I've seen anything from John Rice Plumlee. If you told me right now, I could take George Pickens out of it for a second. That's sort of a different subject for a different day. Just give it to me, Nick Cross or John Rice Plumlee. I want Nick Cross.
And I understand. I get that, and I understand why. I find it a little weird that he's taking an unofficial to Georgia on Thursday, and then he's flying and taking an official visit to Penn State over the weekend. He's already seen Georgia a lot. That strikes me as kind of odd. But to your point about Mathis and being a 6'6" guy that can run, Plumlee's like fundamentally just a better athlete than Mathis is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Jeff has said Mississippi State was willing to offer him as a cornerback. When he was first being recruited 2 years ago. So, the whole big-time arm athlete upside. I don't know how much of an advantage Mathis has there for.
So let me run through a few of these comments here. Scott Harris and a few people brought this up. Could they just offer Plumlee a baseball scholarship first? The problem is there aren't that many full scholarships in baseball. It's a weird sport from that regard that, I think you only get 12 total scholarships for the entire roster. Now, that's what it used to be. It's probably changed now. We've probably got a bunch of people that know more about that than I do in the comment section. So the notion of getting a full baseball scholarship, that just doesn't happen a ton. From that situation, that's probably not going to be there. John William Adams says that Cross is crazy fast, 6'3", 60 meters, ridiculously elite. I'm in Cross camp. Let's go get the Arizona cornerback next year, Keely Ringo. Yeah, Ringo had some nice things to say about Georgia recently
like
as well.
Like it better if his name was Keely McCartney.
Yeah, that's a reference to a Ringo star from Colorado there. Brett Oglesby says that John Rice Plumlee is a better athlete than Baker Mayfield. That may be the case. Mike Anderson.
Baker's not an outstanding athlete. Yeah, I mean, he ran around like he's a capable athlete.
Yeah.
And he ran around a lot, but he's not. Plumlee's a better athlete.
Was Baker a multi-sport star in high school?
I don't know.
The reason why I'm confusing him with Manziel, because Manziel was a multi-sport star, right? I'm confusing those. Mike Anderson says Mathis is a project, and Bennett's not a starter. You need a Plumlee behind Fromm. So on that subject alone, do you think that John Rice Plumlee could be a number 2 quarterback next season?
I do.
Do you really? Wow, that's interesting. That's really interesting. John Chappell, and I'm reading this comment because it reflects what a lot of people say, that Plumlee will be a star, book it. So John is not the only one who feels that way. Now, I don't know if you're thinking he's going to be a star or you just like him to have on the roster, but there are a lot of people like John who say, I've seen a spark in him that makes me think he's going to be more than just a capable player, but the kind of person who can be a really good quarterback.
I mean, he carried his Mississippi high school team to a state championship appearance game against Nakobe Dean's more talented Horn Lake team. As far as a star, it's tough to predict that because if you look at the schools he's, being considered for, Auburn's got Bo Nix. I don't think they're going to play Plumlee over Bo Nix unless Bo Nix just stinks for some reason. Like, they're going to give Bo Nix every opportunity to be the guy there. Mississippi State, I do think is a little interesting, certainly because of Joe Moorhead's work with Trace McSorley, who's got a sort of similar
How
build.
much eligibility does Keaton Thompson have left? Is that his name, Keaton Thompson?
I believe he's got 2 years left.
So you're talking about, it would certainly seem that he's the heir apparent star.
Right,
because people really liked him a lot.
Plumlee's going to go sit, regardless of where he goes. Florida State, they've got a really strange quarterback situation. They've got a lot of moving parts. James Blackman.
Because he's not transferring now, right? Blackman's not leaving Florida State.
No, the one that's allegedly looking at transferring is DeAndre Francois as a potential
But they were
transfer.
both talking about leaving for a while. Now it sounds like
I think
Blackman's
going
not.
to stay.
Philip Jordan Wells says that in our Facebook comment section that he's going to remain patient and assume that John Rice Plumlee actually still ends up at Georgia as a part of the blue shirt.
If we wake up on February 7th and no school has tweeted out the graphic of John Rice Plumlee, welcome to the class, I think you have to feel pretty great about Georgia's chances of getting Plumlee.
So Robert Clark says, if Plumlee is that good, why didn't the staff just offer him a scholarship? Why give it to the other guys? I think the problem with that, though, is that for better or for worse, this is Georgia trying to have its cake and eat it, too. I mean, they could have made it very easy on themselves, but that's just not the way that Kirby does his business. He wants to get the maximum. I'm talking about the maximum value out of the roster, and this is the way they do that. As other people said on Facebook a moment ago, he wasn't an early enrollee. That's what Georgia needs for its backup situation for next year. So therefore, they're not going to, and I'm using casual language with this, they're not going to burn a scholarship on him now if he's not really in competition for the backup quarterback role. So this is Georgia just trying to be as greedy as it possibly can, which as much as it may make you a little nervous if you're really in the John Rice Plumlee camp, overall I'm glad Georgia goes about this business in as aggressive a fashion as it does.
Yeah, Tyler Arnold had made a really interesting point. It's something Plumlee's told Jeff. I think Plumlee wants to be at Georgia more than any other school. I think that is certainly the case. Georgia was the first one to say, hey, you're a quarterback, you're our quarterback, whereas some of these other schools came in a little bit later. But I just go back to he wasn't an early enrollee, and because of the way the field situation sort of shook out, Georgia needed bodies at quarterback, and guys that could get hit during spring practice to help the defense. Mm-hmm. And Plumlee wasn't going to be there, and unfortunately, that's just the way this situation is looking like it's going to shake out.
And for those of you that maybe are just kind of only now getting acquainted with what John Rice Plumlee is. This is a guy that did take a lot of visits to Georgia, kind of on his own dime, hanging out, watching games. I mean, he definitely has that Georgia fan quality that you like for football players to have, guys that just really like Georgia. People like that about Blaylock. They like that about really a lot of guys that just like the program. I think you got 20 guys in Nazir Stackhouse, I think, is a Georgia fan and just likes the program. You like that about Georgia recruits, and he's certainly one of those as well. Kid says he's also a heck of a baseball player, and while we don't talk a ton of baseball around here, I do like baseball.
Good baseball player.
I would imagine this is one of those that Scott Strickland's probably crossing his fingers for, that maybe this all falls in his lap and he can get himself another pretty talented player out of all this.
Jeff chiming in with two things. One, Plumlee went to UGA road games.
That's pretty cool.
Which,
that's
cool.
something
that you do like to see. And two, if Plumlee sticks, does he become a top 5 fan favorite? I think given the position he's going to play, backup quarterback, I think there's a good chance.
This
whole situation, he's endeared himself, and with the way he's handled it, he's endeared himself to a lot of Georgia fans.
This is a tough class to crack the top 5 in, though, because different players have different legions of fans. Blaylock's got his, Nolan's got his, Nakobe's got his. This is a pretty tough class to crack the top 5 in when it comes to fan favorite status, though. By the way, how does Jeff get the cool little DawgNation thing on YouTube? Like, when I type a comment in, if I type a comment, it just shows up as Brandon Adams. But when Jeff types a comment, it shows up as DawgNation. Now, all of a sudden on Facebook, when I used to type comments, it used to show up as me. Now I show up as DawgNation over there. So I have no idea how any of this technology works.
I can tell you, you just got to have access to the DawgNation YouTube account.
I am lucky that we can even get on the air every day. If it wasn't for other people, Connor Riley included, I don't think I'd ever even get on the air. Nonetheless, we got to get ready to go. As I said, tomorrow, we're going to have a surprise, I think. I can't say it yet, but it's going to be really fun, and I'm really excited about it, and so we'll tell you about it then, and we will talk to you then. See you at 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. And by the way, speaking of Jeff Sentell, was with us in the YouTube comment section. Check out his work at DawgNation.com as we get close to the start. Not even the start. It'll be just National Signing Day next Wednesday, so we're heading towards that finish line. We'll look forward to having plenty of conversations with you about that between now and then. Have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow back here on DawgNation Daily.